in their schools, they're dying in their communities, and if they're not dying, they're drilling. Every day in America, kids are going through traumatizing mass shooter drills. And so it's just maddening to me that this committee, as our kids are dying, with the responsibility of protecting our kids, the greatest resource in our community, that they would bring you here and attack you, whose job is to protect our kids. I look at this as very binary. You can protect your home, you can take your kids hunting, you can shoot for sport, but if you're not on the side of protecting our kids, you're on the side of helping their killers. That's it. You either can help the kids or help the killers. But I also fear that this rhetoric from my colleagues is putting targets on the backs of law enforcement. Director Delabach, have you seen increased threats over the years to your agents and just federal law enforcement in general?
It is my deepest honor to be here representing the brave men and women, the career people who work at ATF every day. And what I will say is that attacks on a political appointee, I understand, unfortunately, it's just become part of our country, but I would say those men and women who are out there doing their job, risking their lives to try to protect people in law enforcement and all of these functions at ATF, they deserve our respect and support. It is the greatest honor of my professional life to be able to sit here and call them colleagues, because they're incredibly brave, dedicated people. And they're not people who have been all personally involved, right? They're there because they care. That's the same with our state and local law enforcement partners.
And when they're attacked by political leaders, does it make it easier or harder for you to recruit people to go into law enforcement to protect our communities?
I think, it's no surprise that it is difficult it's a very difficult and dangerous job to start with, and it is more difficult to recruit people and retain people now than ever. And so I just think as a country, we can try to support the brave work that these career people are doing while having our disagreements about things we feel passionately about.
I was raised by a cop, 2 Republican parents, and they were a pro-police party, but I fear that that is no longer the case. Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of our colleagues, campaigns and raises money on a defund the FBI platform. Chip Roy on this committee has often said we need to defund the border and the police who are at the border. Mr. Massey on this committee has called for defunding the ATF. The chairman of this committee, Jim Jordan, recently said in a TV interview that he wants to defund the FBI and the Department of Justice. And this committee's chairman had, before this committee, in just the last 45 days, a witness who said, F cops. When you're the chairman, you can call anyone who walks this earth as a witness. And they called somebody who had recently tweeted this year, F cops. So, Mr. Delabach, I fear that they continue to put a target on the backs of good, honest, working cops who walk the beats in our community, and I share your concern with that. I also want to ask you if it would surprise you to learn that JAMA Network, which is a medical journal, recently estimated that the economic consequences of gun violence in our community is $557 billion a year. That takes into account police investigations, medical treatment, long-term physical and mental health care, earnings lost to disability or death, criminal justice costs, pain and suffering, and that is equal to 2.6% of America's gross domestic budget, 5 times the budget of the Department of Education. I hope that eye-popping number, if kids dying in our classroom doesn't get the attention of my colleagues, I hope money will talk to them. But does it surprise you to learn that that's the estimate, $557 billion a year?
I don't know about the particular numbers. I know, obviously, violent crime costs our society in many ways. It costs a physical, a psychological, community, medical, and financial toll.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Felons in possession and so forth. I would say that, well, let me ask you this question. There are different definitions of mass shootings. We've said that, I think, 160 or something mass shootings this year or something in that zip code, however you define that.
I believe...
Not necessarily get to the question. In your reporting of that, how many of those shooters can you report were on medication?
I don't know the facts to be able to answer. I'm sorry.
Okay, I think that's an important thing, and I'd like ATF to get us an answer on the 165 mass shootings. How many were on medication? How many were from single parent homes without fathers?
Again, those may not be all ATF investigations, and I don't know the answer to that.
Well, but it's important you guys collect data on virtually everything. I think it's really important for us to know that. Can you tell us how many of the perpetrators were, for example, involved in social media and certain websites, or how many of them had dropped out of school?
Again, I don't have a number on that. I would agree with you that those are all significant problems that we have to address as a society.
Well, I think that's something that's really important, and I want ATF to get us that information, because that has been missing from a lot of the conversation. As we focus in on the weapons being used, I want us to make sure that we're very clear about the nature of the individuals that are carrying out these heinous acts. What is happening in our societies? What is happening to our young men? What is happening to young men in fatherless homes? What is happening to people on medication? What is happening with respect to mental health? Because if we look at the data and we see what has occurred, particularly under COVID, and we look at both suicide rates up like 10%, murder rates spiked like 40%, and I think with the use of firearms, we see that we had a serious mental health issue and the use of medication. I think that's something the ATF ought to focus on. But here's something that I want to ask about. You all had an ATF agent named Brandon Garcia who submitted a resignation letter, I think you're probably familiar with, in which he wrote, ATF has been spending a significant amount of time talking about and changing the course of this agency to focus on, quote, the guns, end quote. Agent Garcia also noted the following. Last year, our headquarters spent pretty much the entire year talking about the vaccine and threatening termination for those who wouldn't get it. The deputy director threatened to prosecute agents for lying to a federal agent if we did not appropriately update our vaccination status in the system. He also noted that they were saying nothing about holding people accountable for the crimes they commit unless it supports their agenda. I think that's a question that I think we all want to know the answer to, which is, are we focusing on going after criminals carrying out bad acts, harming the American people
every day
for use of guns,
every day,
as opposed to targeting law-abiding citizens for the use of having a weapon that they are entitled to be able to have under the Second Amendment?
We are indeed focusing on taking violent criminals and trigger pullers out of our community. Of course, working with state and local law enforcement, right? Every day, and you know that from being a PSN prosecutor. I was a PSN prosecutor also. Those are very important. And with respect to the causes of these acts, I think it is correct there are numerous causes. ATF is not responsible for addressing them. Of course, Congress, you look at the whole field of play as to what drives violent crime.
But does the director agree that it would be a very important thing for us as Congress and for ATF to focus on the mental state and the medicines being used by the perpetrators of these crimes?
I think certainly that public policymakers ought to focus on that.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm going to run out of time. One other, because I got limited time. Sure. One other question with respect to the issue we're dealing here with the pistol braces. We know for sure that the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit has overwhelmingly ruled that ATF overstepped its authority when it published the final rule that classified bump stocks as machine guns. Now, to make sure that it's very clear that I'm an equal opportunity basher of tyranny, the Trump administration issued that bump stock rule, and they were wrong to do it. They shouldn't have done it. They did it, the Fifth Circuit struck it down. The fact is, what we know about this rule, the pistol brace rule, is that it is the exact same overstepping of power. And that I think the director ought to respond to that question in just 1 minute, but I want to ask one question pretty quick right here as I wrap up. Do you believe that Americans have an individual right to bear arms?
The Supreme Court has said that. So yes, that the Supreme Court has said in the Heller decision and then in the Bruin decision that the Second Amendment,
individual right
the Second Amendment gives the individual right to keep and bear arms.
And so what I would just suggest to the director is that when we know the Fifth Circuit has slapped down a regulatory overreach with respect to bump stocks under a Republican president, and now we have an effort here under pistol braces, which is looking backwards to take a piece of plastic, as my friend from Kentucky said, to add to a weapon, and to say to someone who had a lawful product for the entire time they've had it, to now say that it is unlawful. Would the director agree that that is something that the Fifth Circuit is very well going to look at and say that is an overstep of the executive branch over legislative authority? I yield back.
You may answer the question.
As with the bump stock case, it is in litigation. Different circuits have come out different ways on that, and I think there's a petition for certiorari before the Supreme Court. ATF's position on that, I mean, the department's position is laid out in hundreds of pages of briefs. The first ruling, which actually came out of a district court in the Fifth Circuit on the stabilizing base rule, found that it lived within the statute and was lawful under the APA, at least as a preliminary injunction matter.
But the Fifth Circuit has held that has said that it
The
is
courts,
violative.
again,
The gentleman yields. Ms. Scanlon, you have 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, and thank you, Director Dettelbach, for your testimony today. My constituents in our country are reeling from the daily toll of gun violence. A rational person should expect Congress to ask the head of ATF to come to Congress and testify about what we can do to end this daily recurring national tragedy, but that's not why this hearing was called. This hearing was called to attack ATF and its leadership, to undermine ATF's ability to do its job. It's been called to complain about technicalities and paperwork that actually save lives. Second Amendment extremists often claim we don't need new laws, we just need to enforce the laws that are on the books. But that's what a well-funded and fully staffed ATF does. It's critical to enforcing the laws that are already on the books and stemming the carnage caused by unlawful and irresponsible gun sales that are used to kill more than 130 Americans every day. I want to focus today on important ATF tools that can check rogue gun dealers who profit from sales as they willfully enable violent crime with straw purchases and unlawful sales. And I know we have to move quickly because of timing, so if you want to submit additional information, we'd love to see that. More than 20 years ago, an ATF study showed that just 1% of federal firearms licensees, or FFLs, were the source of more than 60% of all guns traced to crime nationwide. Since then, congressional gag laws have prevented ATF from publicly sharing data that can be used to examine patterns of gun trafficking or to identify gun dealers who profit from selling guns to criminals, whether directly or indirectly. However, the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence recently analyzed 2 decades of data about crime guns released by Pennsylvania, and that report confirmed the trend still holds. And in Pennsylvania, just 1% of gun dealers were the source of 50% of crime guns. Can you briefly tell us how ATF uses crime or trace data to prioritize dealers for compliance inspections and prevent firearms from being diverted into the illegal market?
ATF is committed to transparency to the extent allowed under the laws passed by Congress. And I would point out that recently, just several months ago, under the direction of the Attorney General and the President, ATF published the single largest compendium of information on crime guns ever put in one place in the United States in one of our firearms trafficking and commerce reports, Volume 2. It goes state by state. There are 40 cities. We will do analyses for any cities that weren't included in the first 40. And it tells the story in a way that hasn't been told before with data as to how firearms get from lawful commerce to crime scenes. We take that kind of data and use it as part of our crime gun intelligence program to try and target as best we can, and we can do better at this. We need to keep striving to push ourselves to be better. As best we can, our very limited resources to try and stop that flow of unlawful firearms so that we're not focusing on the vast majority of firearms dealers, which are law-abiding businesses. And we're focusing as much as possible either on those that willfully violate the law, but also, it's important to understand, to harden the targets because even if you're a law-abiding firearms dealer, but you're being targeted by a criminal firearms trafficking organization to help them to follow the rules which are designed to protect them from being victimized even unknowingly. Okay. So we work collaboratively with firearms dealers all over the country on this.
Well, I appreciate that. One of the gun dealers that perhaps is not an unwilling victim is a Philadelphia gun shop called The Firing Line. And in this report published concerning Pennsylvania crime guns, it was determined that 1,800 crime guns were traced to this one gun dealer between 1999 and 2020. A 2017 ATF inspection report of the dealer, which I have here, found multiple repeat violations, including willfully transferring firearms to prohibited purchasers, facilitating the straw purchase of firearms, missing firearms, and a failure to respond to ATF trace requests. Now, obviously, this is before your tenure. But despite that record, the Trump administration's ATF issued a warning to the dealer instead of revoking its license. They got a stern talking to, but they continue to profit from their sale of guns that are used in crimes in Pennsylvania and beyond. So Congress has given ATF authority to revoke licenses. Can serious violations such as willful transfer trigger the zero tolerance policy that ATF is working on now?
The key word that you use is what Congress said, which is willful. When we find that firearms licensees are willfully violating the laws that Congress has passed, and we have articulated several, I think 5 specific violations, although willful conduct can be broader than that in certain circumstances. That's what we try to do with respect to targeting our resources with respect to filing a notice of revocation. After the notice is filed, the licensee has the right to a hearing and to go to federal district court as well.
Thank you. And Chairman, I see my time has expired, but I have 2 unanimous consent requests. The first is I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a report from the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence entitled Uncovering the Truth About Pennsylvania Crime Guns.
So ordered.
Okay. I also seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the video played by Mr. Cicilline at last week's Judiciary Committee markup that demonstrates how the gun industry markets and many gun buyers actually use the stabilizing braces, not as assistive technology for disabled veterans, but as a way to convert large format pistols into short-barreled rifles and evade the National Firearms Act.
So ordered.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields.
Yes.
Next, I'd like to take 5 minutes to ask a few questions. Director Dettelbach, are you familiar with Operation Fearless from a decade ago?
I'm sorry.
Operation Fearless from a decade ago, are you familiar with that?
I don't know that I'm familiar with the details of that particular operation. If you start talking about it, maybe I'll be reminded of the name, but not as I sit here.
So the largest state newspaper in Wisconsin wrote about it, suggested a lack of planning and oversight in regards to trying to get people who were running drugs, running guns, stuff like that. I take it you're not familiar with that?
Again, by name, if you could, was this related to a certain type of investigative technique? I might know it not by the name, but by the facts as you say them.
Yeah, so it happened in Milwaukee, and they found out later after the investigative story was put out by the Journal Sentinel in Milwaukee that this is actually being done in 5 other cities also. And are these type of operations still going on around the country?
No, not knowing the type, what type of operation. If you tell me just in general, I can.
So failed operation, Operation Fearless, is an ATF violent crime impact team opened a storefront in Milwaukee neighborhood.
A storefront. Okay.
Yep.
So with respect to, and I do remember some of the public reporting on the storefront issues. So I'm not going to comment on any ongoing operation that ATF may be or may not be undertaking, but I'm glad to talk about that, which is, look, when we do in law enforcement,
are there operations like that?
I'm not going to reveal whether any law enforcement ongoing pending operation is occurring now or not.
Okay, thank you.
That would endanger people in the field, and we can't do that.
Because it was a failed operation, and it was shown that it was being done around the country by the ATF, and which was really a serious problem. And we would like to know if things like that are going on.
Well, so no, but I understand. With respect to storefronts generally, I think there was public reporting, and there were some issues with the way that storefront operation was conducted. ATF did, I believe, I wasn't there, but my understanding is from the U.S. Attorney's community. My knowledge there was that ATF did impose additional restrictions and change the way those operations were going to try and better run them.
If you provide that data, that'd be terrific.
I think in that, if I remember correctly.
If you would. So is it I take it it's a priority at ATF to review FFL violations. Is that correct?
It's a priority at ATF to focus on violent crime and to try to get shooters and to stop the supply of unlawful firearms to those most violent people. That is a priority at ATF.
Do you agree with the Biden administration's zero tolerance policy that they've enacted in regards to FFLs?
We implement the Enforced and Regulatory Enhancement Initiative, which people call different things, and I think we're referring to the same thing, which focuses on a limited number of willful violations. And so Congress has said that that's what we should be focusing on.
Well, that's what the Biden administration said. It was an executive order.
Congress said that willful violations are the only kind that can result in revocation.
So the number of revoked FFLs are up significantly, correct, in 2022?
I believe that there were 90-some that were as a result of this particular enforcement.
Has it reduced crime?
The Congressman was talking about this before. There are lots of causes of gun crime, and it's impossible to say that any one of them is going to be the silver bullet. But that, to me, doesn't mean you don't work on all of them to try and address the issue.
Sure. So as we talk about these FFLs, do you have regular training for your employees in regards to how to review these FFLs?
Regular training. I'm sorry, yes, we have regular training for our employees at ATF. Yes, we do, Congressman.
And are there violations for violating these firearms transaction records?
Are there
penalties for violations?
If an
filling out?
FFL is in violation, there's a series of different actions at different levels that the statute allows ATF to take.
And also firearm transaction records, right?
Like a 4473?
Yeah, if they inaccurately fill that out or if they lie on it, there's penalties,
Well,
right?
the person who's buying the weapon fills out many parts of the 4473, and if that person who's buying the weapon doesn't tell the truth on those forms, there are serious penalties for lying on that form.
If they violate, should they be prosecuted? Yes or
That's
no?
up to U.S. attorneys' offices to determine. We investigate cases, refer them to U.S. attorneys' offices, and they make those determinations.
So if someone violates, regardless of who they are in society, they're turned over to a district attorney and to be charged?
If ATF investigates a matter and believes that there's been a violation, it would be referred to the appropriate prosecutor.
Should the president's son be turned over since he violated Form 4473?
I think that's been publicly reported that is an ongoing investigation. Again, I am not going to comment on any ongoing investigation.
So you don't take a position on we should have equal justice, we should not have a two-tier system of justice?
I'm not able to comment on any ongoing investigation, whether it's the undercover operations that you referred to or any particular case. I just can't comment under long-standing Department of Justice policy under both parties' administrations on pending investigative matters.
I've exceeded my time and yield that time and would recognize the gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. McBath.
Thank you so much, Chairman, and thank you, Director Dettelbach. It's good to see you, and thank you for coming before the Judiciary Committee today. I thank you so very much for the important work that you're doing in your role as Director of the ATF, the first permanent one that we've actually had in this country in over 8 years. Can you imagine that? And so 8 years, the ATF conducts some of the most critical work of preventing crime from happening, such as by ensuring background checks are completed so that those who are not legally able to possess a firearm cannot actually purchase them. ATF, we know, also works with local and state law enforcement, as he has expressed over and over again this morning, to trace firearms that have been used in violent crimes, to assist in making convictions in prior crimes and stopping future crimes from happening. They also work to prevent illegal firearms trafficking, reducing the risk of public safety in our towns and our cities. If this Congress is committed to keeping our communities safe, keeping Americans whole, we must do everything in our power to support the ATF and its initiatives. Director Dettelbach, one of the great achievements of the 117th Congress was the passage of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Law. That was my law. The most significant gun safety package in almost 30 years. The initiatives set forth in that law include things such as funding for the implementation of extreme risk protection order programs and laws that ensure that firearms are not in the hands of those a court has found through due process as a danger to themselves or to their community. Funding for community violence intervention and working to close the gun show loophole. Please share with us, because I do believe that you have been just unjustifiably kind of attacked today. So please share with us how the ATF is implementing all of the provisions of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, that law.
Thank you. Congress passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act shortly before I came on as director of ATF. And since that time, the parts that actually fall within ATF's jurisdiction, we've been working very hard to implement. There are other parts, because this is an all-of-the-above approach that has to be taken to violent crime. Others are working on more. But two of the things that Congress did was gave us our first standalone straw purchase felony and our first standalone firearms trafficking felony under federal law. And we have been investigating with our state and local partners those kinds of cases. And we've brought over 30 different defendants, more than that, have been prosecuted. The other thing I want to say is, you know, we also work with industry. So a couple of weeks ago, I was in St. Louis with the National Shooting Sports Foundation, rolling out the Don't Lie for the Other Guy campaign there. That's a campaign where we work together to try and educate firearms dealers, licensees. I was in a gun store to catch straw purchasers, how to recognize it, what to do, because they are often our first line of defense. And so we are doing enforcement, we're doing education, we're doing training. We've trained everybody at ATF, so thousands and then thousands of prosecutors across the country. I have personally gone to speak to large groups of law enforcement agencies about this. So it's, again, an all-of-the-above approach to do what we can. Congress didn't give us any money for that, but we are not stopping. We're going to do everything we can to implement that important law.
Thank you. So in what ways does ATF, well, you really kind of already answered the question. I wanted to know, how did you work with state and local law enforcement agencies? But you've really kind of stated that in that last answer. But why are these partnerships so important to ATF?
We are a very small agency compared to all the other federal law enforcement agencies. We're a small law enforcement agency, 5,000 plus people with a huge mission. It's all gallows humor, right? Well, we have 5, but at least we don't have a big mission: violent crime, right? It's hard. It's a very difficult, large mission. So how do you do it? You do it by force multiplication and partnership. You do it by sitting on task forces. You do it by sending an agent to work in the homicide unit of a major city police department. You do it by working on the carjacking initiatives that we're working on in Philadelphia. You do it by going after the gangs along with state and local law enforcement that we do in California, in New York, in the middle of the country, all over the country. Every single day, ATF, and I work with the other law enforcement agencies, and I have for years, but ATF, we do that partnership with state and local law enforcement better than anybody. And when I go and talk to chiefs, the number one things that chiefs and sheriffs say over and over again is, please send more ATF resources. And I tell them that everybody is asking for it, and you're all correct.
Thank you, and I'm out of time.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Sparks, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Dettelbach, what is the core mission of your agency?
The core mission is to prevent and protect the American people from violent crime.
So do you believe that, trying to, pretty much turn millions of Americans, law-abiding citizens, into criminals just for owning a piece of plastic is really where you should put so much emphasis? Is it something you have nothing else to do?
I don't want to repeat the answers I've given because I know you have limited time, but no, I don't believe that.
Big priority for your agents?
And I don't believe that's what we are doing. We are effectuating. Congress passes a law.
Well, that's what you're doing in the fact. That's what you're trying to do. But I yield my time to Mr. Massey of Kentucky.
Thank the gentlelady from Indiana. Mr. Dettelbach, you were asked a question by a Democrat earlier about statistics on the defensive use of firearms. Are you aware that CDC used to track that and that they've removed it from their website?
I'm not aware of all the CDC things that they tracked. I know at one point there were prohibitions on them publishing data. I do not know what that situation is.
At one time, the CDC tracked the defensive use of firearms, and after officials were lobbied by activist gun control organizations, they removed that data. I think it'd be helpful to have that data. Let me ask another question very quickly. The regulatory impact assessment on page 18, your agency says you considered the numbers, the impact, and to look at the number of people impacted, their amount of dollars, you considered from 2013 to 2020. Why did you not consider 2020, 2021, and 2022 in the regulatory impact assessment?
Of what? Are you talking
I'm sorry, on the pistol braces, the number of pistol braces.
So I don't have it in front of me. I know that the notice of proposed rulemaking came out before I came on, and I think it was sometime in 2021. I don't know when data was referred, but I do know that there is significant information in that APA record and in the public document that is not consistent with some of the numbers that people have said here today about how many individuals are impacted.
It's because, yes, the RA understates greatly the impact of this because you didn't consider the most recent numbers of production. In the millions, you left off millions of them. A quick question about a couple other topics here. The bump stock regulation was in response to a shooting in Las Vegas. Do you have any information at all that might lead you to believe there were actually NFA weapons in Las Vegas? In other words, guns that have been converted to machine gun fire or unregistered machine guns in addition or instead of the bump stocks?
I am not privy to the details of the investigation, so I do not have any information about the details of that.
Who's in possession of those firearms?
I don't know who's in possession of those firearms.
We'd like to know that. Also, I see that you're cooperating with the FBI, the ATF is, on the January 6th pipe bomb investigation. What can you tell us about how that's going?
Obviously, that's a significant matter. It is an ongoing criminal investigation, and so I'm not going to comment on an ongoing criminal investigation.
Were those pipe bombs operable?
Again,
the ATF is the expert.
Again, it's an ongoing criminal investigation, and under long-standing policy, I cannot comment.
And we've just had a whole committee for 2 years that investigated ongoing investigations, so I'm not accepting that answer from you. We need to know these things. Do you know how the pipe bomb was discovered at the DNC? We've been told how it was discovered at the RNC, and according to a press release from the FBI, you're working with them on this investigation.
Respectfully, I understand your disagreement, but I cannot comment because it is an ongoing criminal investigation.
Well, I think you can comment. Can you tell me, in the time that we have remaining, why a national firearms registry is not only against the law, but also extremely problematic for law-abiding Americans?
The reason that a national firearms registry is against the law is because Congress has passed a provision prohibiting ATF from having a national firearms registry. It's against the law, in short, because Congress has determined it's against the law, and we will do and need to continue to follow that law because Congress makes those decisions.
If you require millions of gun owners to register firearms simply because they have a piece of plastic, are you circumventing this congressional law against a registry of firearms?
The National Firearms Act provides for a different registry, has since 1934. Something like 50 Congresses have sat between now and then and have not changed that.
Well, let me just clarify. You've swept millions of firearms into that registry without an act of Congress, and my time has expired. I recognize Ms. Dean from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, want to acknowledge all of the advocates who are here today. I know I see Moms Demand in great numbers. Thank you for your extraordinary patience and tenacity and work. We will get this done. It's just a question of when and how many lives will it take in the meantime. I think we also have Students Demand. I think we even have a survivor of gun violence. We have Brady, we have Everytown, we might have 97%. To all of the advocates, even if you're not a part of one of these groups, I thank you. I think every American citizen is a mom's demand, is a dad's demand, is a student's demand. That's who we are. My constituents are talking to me and demanding that we do better, that we do more, that the price of the Second Amendment is not lives. We have to prize life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as much as some prize guns. So to the survivor today, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your strength. I met with students this week. I have a advisory committee of high school students. I meet with them quarterly. And I have been thinking about them as I've sat through this absurd hearing, a hearing where the director of ATF and the incredible men and women who are involved in the work of ATF, law enforcement work to keep us safer, are being attacked. When I met with the students this week, it was one of my worst meetings with them. They were notably down. They were worried for their future. Their number one worry, gun violence. Number one worry. They said they didn't have real hope. They're tired of training for active shooter drills, and I'm a grandmother of 4. I'm very upset to think any day of the week, my granddaughter, 11 years old, is doing active shooter drills. So I sit here thinking this is a nightmarish hearing. It is Orwellian. Do the folks on the other side of the aisle see the worries of our students? The nightmarish upside-down version of a hearing that we are having today, attacking the very people who are trying to keep us safe? The folks on the other side who spent the last election cycle saying Democrats want to defund the police, while they actively say they would like to eliminate ATF, actively said would like to defund ATF. What my students talked to me about was their worry over their own safety, their own lives, their own mental health. What they talked to me about was attacks on rights, whether it's trans rights or women's rights. You know what they didn't mention to me? Regulation of stabilizer braces. That was not on their agenda. It wouldn't have made their top 100. In fact, it would not have made their list at all. We could learn a lot from those kids, and I will continue to listen to them and promise them that along with your help and your extraordinary leadership, we will get this done. So let's go to the actual work that you do. Could you tell me about the work that ATF does? I know you spoke a little bit about the tracing of guns, which is crime guns, which is so critically important. What does ATF crime gun tracing work look like? Could you describe it to us
Sure.
in a little way?
So when a crime happens and a local police department, usually it's local because they have most of the cases, opens a case and they associate a particular firearm with a crime. It's found at the scene or what have you. They then submit a request to ATF to trace that firearm. Now, ATF we don't have a national gun registry by law, so what we can do is we can trace the firearm to its first retail sale that we know of. That's usually what happens. And we don't have that record, so we get the request in, and if it's a firearms dealer that is still in business, we reach out to them and we say, we don't have the record. We say, can you tell us who purchased this firearm? Pull the 4473 and tell us. Then we can relay that information back to the local police departments. They're often conducting very time-sensitive investigations, and they can follow that lead. If it's a firearms dealer that's out of business, they send their out-of-business records to ATF. They have to be stored in a certain format under the law that Congress has passed. We are, I think, the only customer of Adobe Acrobat. We pay extra money to remove search function from that so that we can then try our best to trace it as quickly as we can and get that same information back to that homicide detective, that gang detective, that narcotics detective who's working the case.
The gentleman's time is inspired.
I just want to ask
Fitzgerald is
one
recognized for
question.
5 minutes.
If you would send to us information
The gentlewoman's
on
time has expired.
the implications of the Safer Communities Act. Anything you're learning. please send it along to us. Thank you. I yield.
Mr. Fitzgerald is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director, for being here today. Oftentimes at these hearings, I just want to bring some balance, I think, because...
Ms. Bush is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, Bush. Thank you. First, let me just say to the advocates that are in the room, to Moms Demand Action, Students Demand, to every town, to every single advocate, survivor that is here, I'm sorry that you have to continue to keep coming back and, you know, and advocating in this way and putting yourself in the middle of this trauma and pulling that forward to be able to save more lives. But as an activist myself, let me just tell you, on those days when it feels like I'm tired, I can't do anymore, just know that you continue, your presence, continuing to show up, continuing to speak, continuing, letting us see you, letting people see you, just know, even if it means you saved one life, that's a life that you save. You're saving lives. So I just want to remind you all that that your work is not in vain. St. Louis and I are here today to talk about accountability for gun violence, for this epidemic that continues to ravage our communities and our country. As my colleagues have pointed out, we lose approximately 120 people in this country every single day to gun violence. And firearm-related incidents are the leading cause of death for children and for teenagers in the United States, and that has been okayed. Actually, we've given it like a red carpet. This is no coincidence. It is the obvious consequence of dangerous policies in Republican-controlled states that flood our streets with guns and enable mass shootings that shatter families and destroy lives. I know this personally as someone who has survived and been traumatized myself by gun violence. But the Republicans are desperate to make ATF a distraction from their pathetic and shameful obedience to the NRA that's getting people killed. That obedience is having a devastating impact on communities around our country. Director Dettelbach, thank you for being here, and I'd like to ask you, yes or no, would you agree that the states with the weakest laws restricting gun ownership have Republican legislatures? I'm talking about Missouri, Alaska, Wyoming, Montana, Mississippi.
Respectfully, it is not my role to talk about these kinds of questions in my law enforcement role.
Well, I will say, I can tell you that a recent study by Everytown comprehensively documents the states with the weakest gun laws. The weakest gun laws, the states with the weakest gun laws are overwhelmingly Republican states. Yes or no, Director, would you agree that these states have some of the highest rates of gun violence?
And again, I'm not there to take issue with any of the data that you said, but in my role as running a law enforcement agency, we take the laws that are passed by legislatures like Congress and we implement them as best we can to protect people. Others have that debate and will continue to, of course. It's an important discussion. I'm not minimizing it. In my current role, it's just not part of what I'm focused on doing.
Well, thank you for that. And they do. For example, in my home state of Missouri, which is a Republican state, it is among the 10 states with the highest rates of gun deaths in the country, the highest rates of gun deaths and the weakest gun laws in the country. This is a state that Donald Trump won. And yes or no, Director, would you agree that lax gun policies in certain states have resulted in firearms flooding municipalities that are unable to override those state-level policies?
And again, respectfully, I don't know the details of all that, but it wouldn't be in my role as ATF director, as a law enforcement officer, to become involved in debates in state policy matters.
Communities like St. Louis experience the brunt of gun violence, this epidemic, because of state-level policies in Missouri and elsewhere that fail to enact common-sense gun laws to keep our communities safe. Republicans' failure to act is deadly. We've seen it over and over again. It's deadly. Less than 6 months ago, we had a mass shooting at the Central Visual and Performing Arts High School in St. Louis that may have been prevented if Missouri Republicans had agreed to enact a red flag law. So when we talk about accountability, we need to talk about who's really at fault here, and we need to make sure that our communities aren't being unfairly targeted by the failures of others. So, Director, let me switch gears. The ATF has had issues in the past with racist and bigoted behavior by agents. Yes or no, are you aware of the Good Old Boys Roundup that the ATF agents participated in the 1980s and 90s?
I am not. I would say I have been to St. Louis recently, and the shooting that you referenced, I just want to say, course, the survivors of gun violence. I meet with victims and survivors wherever I go. ATF was among the first people participating in that investigation on that scene. And I just want to say there's a lot of really good collaborative work going on in St. Louis that I know you know about to try and help protect people both sides of the river on this issue.
Right, and your work is being inhibited by those Republican policies, but thank you. You're right, we are collaborating. Would you answer the good old boys roundup question?
I don't.
Ladies' time is
I
up.
can follow up on that. I don't know about that city.
Okay, we will send you the information. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Klein for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director, for being here. You know, from day one, President Biden has made it clear that he intends to target the Second Amendment rights of millions of law-abiding Americans, from the ATF pistol brace rule to the recent zero-tolerance executive order targeting federal firearm licensees and background checks. It's more apparent than ever that the rights of law-abiding Americans are under attack. I want to go to the out-of-business records issue. Again, it was discussed earlier. As you know, FFLs must give their server of firearm transaction records to the ATF once they go out of business. And these files are converted into screenshots, which you testified that ATF cannot be searched electronically. And that Adobe...
By name.
By name, right. So let's talk about that, because the data is searchable by other computer functions, correct?
I don't want to misstate on a technical question, because I'm certainly not a computer expert. But my understanding is we take out functionality to flatten that data that limits its search function consistent with the restrictions set by Congress. And that most of that was already happening before that report, but then there was an individual server that had not been accessed but was not compliant that we had to do that with that particular data to make sure that we were fully compliant.
So you're aware that a FOIA request by the gun owners of America revealed that a user can filter results using serial number, document type, FFL number, role, frame, manufacturer, weapon type, caliber, model, batch description, batch name, and comments.
So we are compliant with the restrictions that Congress has set forth, but Congressman, these background checks that we conduct are done in homicide investigations where time matters and lives matter. And we are going to use the allowable things that we can do to try and help local law enforcement to catch killers.
You said that ATF processes tens of millions of records per year. And in 2021, ATF told Congress they had over 920 million out-of-business records, including both digital and paper records. So has ATF's out-of-business record gun registry surpassed 1 billion records total?
I don't know. I know that last year, the paper records we received were something like 70 million, and I'm not quite sure of the exact number. There are a tremendous amount of records that we receive, and we are doing our best. Some of them are stored in boxes that sit on the side, and we run into those boxes where there's an investigation and try to help our local law enforcement partners. We're doing our best.
But with all of this information that you're gathering that is searchable, that is enough for you to create a list of every, for example...
It's not.
Well, it is.
Every single firearms dealer that's currently in business, every single one, we don't have any records.
You have the ability to create a registry, for example, of AR-15s and create an enforcement list of his new ban on pistol brace weapons, correct?
I disagree.
Well, I think the evidence is clear that you have that ability, even if you say you don't. Just freezing the name, the searchable database by name is not enough. So what we have here is valid concerns that ATF is taking a backdoor approach to creating a federal firearms registry despite congressional intent and the law that says no such registry should be created. So last year we received a response to a letter sent to ATF regarding our concerns surrounding the out-of-business records and a potential gun registry, and in response you said, or the ATF said, the vast majority of the criminal firearms traces completed by ATF NTC are done for state and local law enforcement agencies, as you just said, across the country pursuant to active law enforcement investigations. And the NTC only traces crime guns, and every trace must be identified as such by the requester by selecting an appropriate crime code when submitting the trace request. But it further states that the NTC has no ability to determine the successful prosecution of hundreds of thousands of crime gun traces it completes annually, nor does it have any way to link a trace for a specific prosecution for a particular year. And last week, you wrote back to a further request that said the NTC cannot determine the number of prosecutions resulted from completing crime gun trace requests. So can you tell me what percentage of local law enforcement agencies use the NTC to trace crimes?
So with respect to the percentage that are currently using, which I think I talk to people about trying to increase it. It's free information in active
half,
criminal.
right?
It's around 50%, give or take.
So if half of the country's local and state law enforcement isn't using the NTC, then what's the purpose of it other than to create an unlawful registry if there's no way to determine that they're contributing to successful prosecutions?
Well, it's because we were asked by, it's over 600 separate times by state and local law enforcement running criminal investigations to trace firearms that local cops, chiefs, sheriffs associated with the crime. And that is important criminal investigative material that we get back to them.
How do you know you don't have that data?
In Highland Park, Illinois, a mass shooter killed 7 people
evidence.
in New York on a
Gentleman's time's
subway.
expired.
A mass
Chair recognizes Mr. Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Duddleback, I'd like to give you a chance to finish your answer. I found when I was a federal prosecutor that this kind of information was extremely valuable, especially in tracking down the potential connection between a single gun and multiple.
There's example after example that I've heard, but that the public has heard, about how traces are critical in dealing with violent crime. In Highland Park, Illinois, a mass murderer killed 7 people celebrating the 4th of July in our country. And an urgent trace was conducted on a federal holiday, turned around within hours, which we can't do for all of them, only the urgent traces, because of some of the legal limits we have. And they used that information, our local partners and federal partners, to catch that person before he could kill again. In the subway shooting in Brooklyn, another mass incident, we were able to turn around an urgent trace that led to the capture of the killer. In case after case after case, this is something that local detectives, that local gang task forces ask us to do, and we turn around those investigative leads. That's what they're called. They're called leads in criminal cases, so that we can help to protect people from being hurt again.
Yeah, and I mean, so for example, you might have a gun that's recovered in a shooting. If you use the trace, you can find it maybe was connected to a previous shooting by a different shooter and get that guy off the street when you wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise, right?
Right. There's a NIBIN tool, which is so important. It basically allows us to run a criminal history of a crime gun, so that there might be a shooting over here where there's no evidence, but just down the block a couple weeks ago, there's another murder. Or somebody shoots up a stop sign. And on that one, we can connect those two to find out they were fired by the same weapon. And the local police can then say, oh, we don't have evidence on this one, but we have a license plate reader on that guy who shot up the stop sign. So we now we're cooking with gas, right? We've got a lead that we can work on in an active criminal case to try and catch the person. And as I think somebody asked me from the other side of the room, it's important because these people act again many times. And so by interrupting the shooting cycle, we're both holding somebody accountable who hurt or killed somebody, but we're also stopping them from doing it again.
So to go back to some of the previous questions you were just asked about getting violent offenders off the streets, wouldn't this be an extremely valuable tool for doing that? If we want to get people off the streets who've used guns before to actually commit crimes, why wouldn't we want to get as much information as possible to link it to them so we could actually arrest and prosecute them?
And while only 50% of the agencies participate, I have found, at least anecdotally, that those with the highest rates of violent crime understand and use the tracing and NIBIN tool very aggressively to try and solve cases. We help our law enforcement partners clear homicides,
and
killings.
50 is better than 0, so I think it makes sense. And
600,000, of course, is better than, that's how many times they asked us individually to trace crime guns just in 2022.
Absolutely. So I know there's concern on the other side about a firearms registry, and this isn't that. In fact, I believe the GAO found in 2016 that the out-of-business database was totally compliant. So I actually don't think that's an issue either. But I think what is clearly an issue is the violence, gun violence on the street, mass shootings in particular. I want to join in commending the action groups, Moms Against Gun Violence, or Moms Demand Action and the like, for the work that you're doing. Makes a huge difference in the communities. I'm old enough to remember Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and I was in school, and so it was still happening. That I remember I was actually a student prosecutor. You had people driving with the wheel in one hand and a beer in the other one, and everybody thought that was fine. That type of social action changed the approach to that and created laws. And I think the work that you're doing is helping to move this in the right direction too. And Lord knows we need it. What I think is 170 plus mass shootings already this year. So we know the gun violence isn't slowing down. And the use of these AR-15s and other weapons of, I'll say it, a mass destruction, essentially on our streets, is really devastating communities. And I think we need to take steps to address it. Just one last quick point. I'll join in sort of noting that I've got colleagues who are actually sponsoring legislation to eliminate the ATF, eliminate the FBI. One suggested eliminating the Department of Justice. So I think if they have their way with that kind of stuff, we won't have any means to prosecute not only gun violence at the federal level, but anything. Cartels, gangs, terrorists, we won't be able to prosecute them at the federal level if that kind of approach goes forward. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ivory. Mr. Hunt, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm going to say the quiet part out loud because we all know exactly what's going on here. It wasn't the fully automatic machine gun that was banned in 1986. It wasn't the bump stock. It certainly is not the pistol brace. And it is not the AR-15, of which I am the owner of multiple.
Well, you could call it clickbait, but, well, she actually really did do it. Shared pornographic images on a public forum. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is the Republican Party right now not meant to be the protector of children? So why are they doing this really dumb, just so dumb, sharing these images? Why is she doing that? Because she's of the line of, it's all publicity, it's all going to get me talked about. James Comer and Jim Jordan head up a few hearings. I've had to record this a few times because I've tried to not get outraged by this, because that's not really going to solve anything. But it is just pathetic, just ridiculous, crazy. You have hearings taking part in Congress, and AOC said something about this recently, that aren't on. I'll go through the tick list, okay? Have you seen any or heard any hearings recently about health, medical situations, improvements to medical technology, medical insurance? No. Jobs, the economy. Biden which is doing very well. No. Okay. Education, apart from the woke stuff. Schools, colleges. No. Housing. Nope. It's very strange, isn't it? These people are there and they get a good salary, by the way. And what are they doing? They're not representing the subjects which matter to you. I could be wrong. Go to any Walmart, anywhere, any state in America, any street, I don't mind. As you buy the checkout, look at all the magazines and all that stuff, the chewing gum. Strike up a conversation with the person in front or the person behind. The first subject you're randomly going to discuss with a stranger is going to be Hunter Biden's laptop. I promise you, you will have nothing else to talk about, because that's all that is. Well, that's all that's going on in Congress from Jim Jordan's point of view, because that's going to solve everything, isn't it? Imagine, the Hunter Biden hard drive is the nirvana for everything. There is a tweet I'm going to read you, okay? It is from a lady called Tammy Wilson. Now, Tammy Wilson is running for Congress. Bear with me, because I've got to look at it while I read it. So, yeah, my eyeline's going to be all over the place. As a hardworking mum running against a MAGA incumbent, I'm going to be very honest with you. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene's political career is over today. Here's why. Some of you may know, but I am the Democrat running against Jim Jordan. When you run in a district like mine, you hear the same things over and over again. People on the left side of the aisle are obviously fired up, but something else is happening. Conservatives are not pleased by the sideshow nature of the MAGA wing of their party, no thanks to people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Every single day I hear more and more voters say while they typically vote Republican, they are unhappy with how the party has been taken over by an extreme element. There is no greater proof than the fact that Lauren Boebert nearly lost, winning by fewer than 550 votes in a deep red district. Now that is significant, right? Boebert's area is solid Republican. Home run, safe seat, should be a huge majority. 550? No wonder she's so insecure. No wonder she comes out with all of this garbage, just hoping somebody somewhere on Twitter will retweet her, because that's what it's come down to. Clickbait. What bullshit. There we go. You won't often hear this out loud, but it's catching on. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been seen as a liability. This isn't my opinion. This is what Republican voters in my district are telling me. Just this month, I met an 84-year-old man who was eating alone at a diner. I approached him. This is Tammy's tweet I'm reading out. She offered to buy him lunch and asked to sit with him. When I told him I was a Democrat running for office, he quickly shot back that he voted for Trump and he felt bad for how people were picking on him. After not too long, however, it turned to the all-familiar conversation. He found the Republican Party just didn't share the traditional values he expects in his candidates. Now, President Biden has said this recently, that the Republican Party of old is not the Republican Party of today. I like to flip that conversation in terms of saying that a lot of people like, Boebert, Gates, and Gosser, they wouldn't be allowed anywhere near the traditional Republican Party. Then it was on fiscal differences. That was what was being discussed in Congress. Not somebody who's not even a politician and the contents of their hard drive. It was about things that really, and there was a level of respect. Yeah. It wasn't like, how can I say something outrageous? How can I find a lie? How can I push a conspiracy theory? How can I say anything which is desperately going to get me talked about? Anyway, let me carry on with on that subject, by the way. That is echo chambered by so many individuals at Fox News. I mean, take Tucker Carlson. I will get to Tucker in a moment. Let me go back to Tammy's tweet. So she's talking about this person that she met at the diner. In particular, he was disappointed in Jim Jordan's response to Jan 6. She says, by the time we were finished speaking, he refused to let me pay for his lunch. In fact, he bought me lunch and told me I gained a voter. She concludes her tweet by saying, Republicans are watching and they are listening. Well, I wonder what they are watching and listening, because I mentioned Tucker Carlson. Can you believe at one stage until recently, he was being considered, and this is just sums it all up, as a potential presidential candidate? No. So if you're a Republican, or you've ever voted Republican, I really would love to know your honest assessment of the situation with people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, specifically what she did on Wednesday, sharing pornographic images to get clicks, clickbait. I know we used that at the beginning with Melania, but where do you stand? If you're a Republican who's gone to the Democrat Party, what made you change your opinion? And how outrageous is this going to get? When in your mind is something actually going to really, really, really just stop it all? Because this is not about politics. It's not about a left or right thing. We're in the area of common decency, which is clearly just non-existent.